In this video, we're going to start our look at the basic functionality of the TI-Nspire CX CAS, and we're going to look at a variety of different types of features it will do in a series of short video clips. So here we're going to start off with looking at the calculator page and looking at the application overview in general. So to start off, if you hit your home button, the on button here, it'll take you to a page like we see here. This page you can manipulate, you can move around it by using what's called the nav pad. This little thing over here is like a mouse pad on a computer. You can move around using the arrows, but if you rub your finger gently over this on your handheld, you'll end up with a cursor on the screen like this, and you can move it around and click on things just like you would on a computer. Also, the click key, to do a click, you would actually hit the center of the nav pad. If you see the little icon here, there's a click icon and a little hand that's closed icon. This is what you'll use to grab things and manipulate them as well. So let's start by adding a new document. So I'm going to move over to the new document and click in the center of the nav pad to select it. And you'll see that we have 7 different kinds of applications that we can use. We've got a basic calculator page, a graphs page, a geometry page, a lists and spreadsheet page, and the spreadsheets operate very much like Microsoft Excel. Then we have a data and statistics, which is an application that is a mini version of a software called Fathom, which is a dynamic statistics software. We have a notes page, which has some really interesting features that we'll discuss later. And then we have the Vernier Data Quest, which is an app that allows you to connect probeware such as motion probes or pH probes or pressure probes, temperature probes, a variety of different things, to the calculator to collect real-time data. From time to time we will use this in classes so that we can actually model real-world phenomena. So we're going to start though by going up here to the calculator page and selecting calculator. And to select it, like I said before, I can rub my finger over the nav pad till I get on here and click, or once I'm on add calculator I can hit the enter key, or I can hit the click key in the center, so either way. So I'm going to add a calculator page. Now, depending on which application you're in, you will have different menu features. So once you're inside an application, when you click the menu key, you will get a variety of different types of choices in terms of submenus. We have the actions menu, and this actions menu has got a variety of different features, anything from a define command, which is probably one of the more powerful commands on the machine, all the way down to clearing variables, clearing the history, deleting variables, and so on. So later on we'll use the define command. I'll show you how that works. There's also features under the number where we can convert decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals. We can factor things and a variety of other things. Now in calculus we will actually use a lot of algebra as well as calculus. So here we have a solve command, a factor command, expand command, and a variety of other things that come in very handy. And then also in the calculus menu we have derivative, integral, limit, a variety of different things that you're used to seeing. Many of these, however, are accessible through what's called the math templates, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So what I want to do first, and again, you can back out of these menus by clicking the back arrow, and you can also do it by hitting escape. Every time you hit escape, it backs out one level. So let's start by just talking a little bit about the define command. So let me hit the menu button, and I'm going to go to actions, and I'm going to get the define command. Now you can also select these by simply typing the number. So I could go down here if I'm let me back out a minute. So if I'm here and I type 1, it takes me to actions. If I type 1 again, it gives me my define command. So for example, let's just define a function. I'm just going to define f of x. So I'm going to do f parenthesis x close paren equals, and I'm just going to type x squared. Hit enter. Okay, now once this is defined, the machine knows what it is, so I can simply call it by name. So I could, for example, say, what's f of 2? Hit enter, and I get 4 because 2 squared is 4. I can do a variety of different things with respect to this. I can define one command relative to another command, or one entity relative to another entity. So for example, suppose I also defined g of x to be sine of x. And then once those two are defined, if I do g of f of x, I get sine of x squared because it took the x squared and put it into the sine function. If I typed f of g of x, it does just the opposite. It takes the sine function, puts it into the x squared function, giving me sine squared of x. So I've got those types of ways that I can manipulate and evaluate functions. Now, the nice thing about this also is I've got all of these algebra commands. So let's go down and talk a little bit about the algebra menu. Solve command. For example, if I click the solve, it's going to ask me for two things. The solve command syntax is an equation, comma, followed by the variable you want to solve it for. So for example, suppose I have x squared minus x, let's say minus 7 equals 0. And I want to solve that for x. I just say comma x. Now I could have more than one letter involved in an expression, and I could have it solve for x relative to other letters that may actually be in the equation as well. So it doesn't have to be all down to one variable in the equation. But if I hit enter, I get these values. Notice that it does give me exact values because I've got my mode set in if I go up here to my settings, I go to my document settings, all of my settings are in calculation mode auto. I've got the choice of auto, exact, or approximate. What auto does is it gives me an exact value if it can. If it can't, it does a numerical approximation. If I had it set in exact mode and it couldn't do it, it simply would give me back the syntax that I entered into the machine. If it was set in approximate mode, it would always force a decimal approximation. So for me, leaving it in auto mode is the easiest thing to do, because if I want to force this to an approximation, I'm going to go up here and grab it. I'm going to hit enter. Rather than retype it, I can just hit enter and it'll copy it down here to the command line. And now, if I want an approximation, if you look above the enter sign, there's the wiggly equal sign. Okay, what that'll do is if I do control enter, it forces the decimal approximation. So since I leave mine in auto all the time, if I want to force a decimal, I just do control enter instead of enter. This way it gives me the flexibility of having exact if I want it, and have an approximation if I desire that too, without having to change settings. So it's a little bit easier to use that way. Other commands, for example, let me go back into the algebra menu, is, let's say, the factor command. So suppose I go in here and I want to factor a polynomial. So let's say I start with x squared minus x minus 6. Okay, I'm not looking to solve an equation. There's no equation here. It's simply an expression. But I want to factor it. So the factor command simply factors it as x minus 3 times x plus 2. Similarly, there's an expand command, and I can go down and I can say, suppose I wanted to expand this thing that's up here. Well, I can just go up on top of it and hit enter, and it'll copy it down to where my cursor was in the command line. And now I hit enter, and it expands it out to what I started with. So I can go forwards and backwards with respect to factoring and expanding things. Now, another nice feature is to have solve not just for a single variable, but suppose I want to solve for a system of equations. I can go into my menu and I can go down to algebra, And you'll notice down here there's a command called solve system of equations, and I can either have any kinds of equations, or if I want to limit myself to just linear equations, I can do that. I'm just going to say solve system of equations in general. And let's say I've got two equations and two unknowns, and let's just call the variables x and y as we have it already here. That's the default. It doesn't have to be that. For example, if I had variables a, b, and c, you could leave those there, and you would just have to enter a, b, and c here instead of x and y. Let's go in here and see what we get. I'll click OK. Notice it sets it up so that I've got little boxes for the two equations, and here it's telling the machine, oh, I want to solve for the variables x and y. So let's start. Let's suppose I have x plus 2y equals 3, and then let's suppose I have 4x plus 5y equals 6. And I want to solve that. Now I just hit enter. And there I get x of -1 and x of 2. I'm sorry, and y of 2. And it will solve it for me. This is particularly handy in applications because you may have parameters involved in families of functions like a, b, and c, and you want to be able to say, oh, I would like to have the parameters a, b, and c solved for in a particular case. So this gives me a way that I can go about finding parameters in a situation that allow me to have a variety of different families of a variety of different parameters to define a family of functions. And we'll talk about those later when we talk about graphing and sliders. Now, in terms of calculus menu, let me go in here and select and show you some of the calculus features. The easiest way for most of the calculus features is to actually click this little button here next to the 9 called the Math Template. And here you'll notice that I've got a variety of different things. For example, first derivative, second derivative, nth derivative, so I can take whatever degree derivative I want there. I've got integrals, I've got limits, and everything else. So I'm able to choose whatever I want. Suppose I want to take the derivative of something. Let me go up here. There's also vectors and matrices, variety of things. Suppose I want to take the derivative with respect to x. Let me move over to this box. Let's just do something like the sine of e all to the x squared, let's say. Okay, so here what the machine did is it applied the chain rule for me and everything else, and it simplified it out. So it's very nice, very handy. If I want to know the second derivative of the same thing, I would just go in here and I would just select the second derivative template right there. Again, I want to take the derivative with respect to x, put that in there. Now, suppose I want to have to retype this. Let me show you a feature. I can go up on top of this, hold my shift key down, and by shift key I mean this key above the 7 key, holding the shift key down, drag across it until it's all highlighted in blue, and now if I do Control C, it copies that thing, and then I can go down and I can do Control V, just like on a computer, and paste it, and this will give me the second derivative. Notice it's longer than my screen shows, but if I want to see it, I can just go up to the top, hit my left or right arrows to get to the front, and then I can scroll across to see all of the pieces of the second derivative process. Okay, so this allowed me to do that. Okay, so that gives me a way to find derivatives. I can also integrate stuff. So let me go in and show you the template there. We have the definite integral. So let's say we have the integral of, let's say from 1, hit my tab key. The tab key is a really nice key for moving around the boxes. So let's say I want to go from 1 to 5, tab, and let's say I have, let's say cosine of, let's put something inside here. Let's just do x squared. And then let's see, let's put out front. I'm going to put an X here. Oh, by the way, when I type an X, you'll notice that the cosine is no longer, it's now italicized because it thinks X CAS is a single word, so to speak. If I want to show multiplication, I have letters next to letters, I need to use the times key. I have to show that I want a multiplication operator there. If it's a number followed by a letter, it will imply the multiplication. But if it's a letter followed by a number, it will not. Because, for example, suppose you want to name a variable x1, x2, x3, and so on. You don't want it to imply multiplication there. So if it's a number followed by a letter, it will imply it automatically. If you have two letters together, or if you have a letter followed by a number, you have to actually use the multiplication operator to make it work. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay, so here it gave me the sine of 25 over 2 minus the sine of 1 over 2. If I wanted to force an approximation, I can just do Control Enter, and that forces the numerical approximation. Now, if I wanted an antiderivative as opposed to a numerical value for an integral, I can go in here and select my integral command, or I could select the integral command that has the limits of integration on it and simply not put anything in there. So for example, suppose now I go up here and I grab this guy and pull him down, Control C, click down here, Control V, with respect to x. Now it gives me the general antiderivative of x times cosine of x squared. Okay, so again, definite integral, or antiderivative. So this gives me ways that I can do that. Another thing I can do is I can find limits. So for example, if I want to find the limit, let's say as actually let's just do a definition of a limit. So let's do the limit as h goes to 0. So I'm going to hit my tab. 0. We'll use the definition of derivative here. Okay, and I'm going to put the difference quotient in here, so I'm going to form a fraction, so I'm going to do Control Divide, that forces a fraction. And I'm going to say, what do I have defined as my function here? I think I defined f of a, let's just do sine of x, g, okay? So let's just suppose I want to find the limit, or in a sense the derivative of sine, so I'm going to say g of x plus h minus g of x all divided by h. This is the formal definition of derivative, and so this is going to find the derivative of my function g. And notice I get cosine of x because the derivative of sine is cosine. Okay. So I can use the limit commands. I can use any kind of function I want to find the limit of. I can use the limit command. So this is a basic functionality that you're going to want to use from time to time on the calculator page. Variety of things from solving equations to using calculus features as well. And they'll come in handy, particularly when you try to apply calculus to real-life situations and you want to play around and explore some possibilities. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about that makes this a little bit different is the fact that in my math template, I can choose a variety of other kinds of features like nth roots and so on. Those are also available over here on the keypad. Next to the 4, you can see the nth root and the square root, but they're also available here in the math templates. You can also do piecewise defined functions. We'll talk about that when we get to the graphing page. But again, matrices, vectors, and so on. So it's not just algebra and calculus, but a variety of other things.